Chapter 6. Liverpool, England, May 22nd.
Hello, what's this? Ain't you a pretty bird?
The voice came to Drusilla as if a whisper, and she stretched her arms out languidly as though she had been sleeping. Lorries and rattling autos chugged by, blasting horrid exhaust. Nearby, someone was singing badly to a melody played on an out-of-tune piano. Raucous laughter exploded behind her, and she blinked.
Hey, girl, I'm talking to you.
Lashes fluttering, she turned to the brute who had spoken. He was a fed beast of a man, with both brawn and bulk, as evidenced by the breadth of his shoulders and the punch of his gut. He smelled as though he had been swimming in ale, and something brown had dried on the long brush of a mustache that hung over his lip. His brows were furrowed and angry as though he had a tiger inside. But he had eyes like a ferret, frightened and suspicious.
I'm talking to you,
he said, loud and slow as though she were stupid. Drusilla was not stupid. She smiled at the man, unmindful of those who might be watching through the filthy windows of the pub behind them. Eyes wide, lips open suggestively, she began a serpentine swaying that brought first a lascivious grin and then an uncertain quiver to his features. She moved nearer to him, still swaying, and his eyes were only on her. There were whores out on the street, girls he might have had for the change in his pocket. He was a mouse, this man, and he had made the mistake of drawing the attention of the cat. "What a specimen you are," Drusilla drawled. She touched his chest, pushed herself against him. "A skulking human animal. Are they afraid of you, the women? Can't they smell the fear on you? It's like cinnamon and awful." Mesmerized, he only swayed along with her, subject to her every whim. Laughter thundered from the pub again, and a glass shattered somewhere. The man's face had changed. He had the aspect of a hog now, wild and tusked and snorting. That was how she saw him. The putrid stench of his fear, sickly sweet with cinnamon, filled her with both pleasure and disgust. She heard horses' hoofs thundering close by and knew that it was death riding for the slobbering hog before her. "Think we'll take a walk," she said, snickering deep in her chest. "Lovely night for a walk." She began to lead him toward the alley beside the pub, but Spike stepped up behind her and laid a hand on her shoulder. "Hold on, pet," he said, his voice low and musical. "Our girl's here." Excited, Drusilla turned, eyes wide again as Spike gestured to a short, pale girl walking beside a silver-haired man of perhaps 50. Grinning, a flutter of crawling insects in her belly, Drusilla threw her arms around Spike and kissed him deeply, though both of them remained completely aware of the girl and her watcher as they passed. Her name was Kate Hutchins. "That one?" Drusilla asked, a bit surprised, as Kate and her watcher went into the door that would lead to the rooms they had taken above the pub. "Might be the Slayer someday." "No," Spike said, nostrils flaring dangerously. "No, she won't." Drusilla's lips were set in a thin, mischievous smile as she and her lover went to that door and followed the pair up to their rooms. On the curb in front of the pub, the rancid drunk shook his head, blinked his eyes, and headed back in for another pint. Above the laughter and the music, no one heard a thing. Dunkirk, France, May 28th. The coast was lined with ships of every conceivable size and purpose. The massive behemoths of the British Navy were moored as close as they could manage off Dunkirk. Yachts and fishing boats buzzed around them like flies, ferrying men back and forth from the shore. France was lost. The Germans had conquered her unimaginably fast. The British Expeditionary Force and regular army soldiers who had fought valiantly to prevent it were now forced to withdraw. Dunkirk was the last bastion of fighting in France, where hundreds of thousands of warriors stood fast against the Blitzkrieg. Though most of the fighting men were unaware of it, the British were evacuating without having informed their French allies. It was their only recourse, and though bitter, all involved were aware of it. There were more than 250,000 Allied soldiers at Dunkirk awaiting transport across the Channel. If there was any hope of rallying from the astonishing German victories to take back the continent, those men could not be sacrificed. The call had gone out up and down the southeast coast of England. Every boat, large or small, was needed to ferry British and French fighters across the Channel, or from the shores of Dunkirk to the larger boats that could not come any closer. The response had been immediate and overwhelming. In the dead of the night, men waited in the thousands on the coast for their turn. There were incidents of violence and ignoble behavior, but for the most part, they waited with grim determination. There was a plan. Winston Churchill, the new Prime Minister, would not allow this to be the end of the war. The battle for France was lost, but as a nation, Great Britain was determined that there would be another. Men swam out to the vessels in the water by the hundreds. They floated on chairs and boards and bits of flotsam, all with the knowledge in their minds that it was not over. They would return. At least, that was the spin the captain of the Sea Spray had put on it. Ned Jude was his name, and he had been dredging the oyster beds near Burnham-on-Crouch in Essex with his ship when the news had spread. Old Ned had dropped his work, refueled and set off across the Channel quick as he could. For the first half a day, he had ferried a dozen men at a time across the water back to England. On the last trip, however, one of the soldiers had suggested it might be more efficient if he used the comparatively small ship to pick up men at the shore and deliver them to one of the Navy ships. Felt like a damn fool, William, I can tell you that. It was the plain truth, and I should have seen it. It was perhaps the 50th time Ned had said as such, but Spike nodded earnestly to men as though he thought the old oysterman was doing a bit of difference, as though he cared. In a quiet moment, he confessed to himself that he did care, just a little bit. Not for the people, not that. He was a vampire, after all, and the behavior of humans who were not currently his victims did not interest him. But there was a part of his humanity that lingered, that haunted him like a phantom limb. The idea that the Germans might actually defeat the British Empire set his teeth on edge, until he reminded himself that he was not supposed to care. Cigarette clamped between his lips, Spike watched the churning waters ahead as they approached the shore of Dunkirk. The men were everywhere. A pack of fools were rowing a small boat out into deeper water, barely able to keep from hitting men who were swimming or floating in the surf. What a bloody circus, he whispered. 'Tis, Ned Jude agreed. But we've all got our part to play, eh? Oh, aye, Spike replied, surprised that the old skipper had heard him. Still, Ned said cautiously, don't want to tell you your business, lad, but taking that girl ashore. The ruddy, jowled seaman shook his head and scratched at the white stubble on his cheeks. No other words were necessary. It's out of my hands, Ned. She's got 3 brothers taken prisoner in Rotterdam, and she's determined to see them free. Believes Jerry will pity on her and her old mum, being without any man at all. Will likely die, but neither one of us could face her mum if we didn't try. Ned Jude scowled. We've got to try, old chap. The skipper said nothing else, but it was clear from his expression they thought Spike and Drusilla would be killed by the first Germans they came across. If the story had been true, Spike judged the old man was probably right. Let him shoot, he thought. Drusilla came out of the cabin and stood silently beside him, the elegant blue dress beneath her heavy coat hinting at an aristocratic background that seemed to garner great deference from the seamen. For once her face was grim and blank, no playful expression, no pout. She watched the exodus on the shore without comment or response. For his part, Spike wondered why he had bothered expending so much energy on the story he told the old man. He considered the possibility that he wanted to avoid having to kill Ned Jude, and then dismissed it. He was merely focused, that was all, intent upon their purpose and wanting to do nothing to slow their progress. Hunting in London had been simple enough, but this, hunting in conquered France, was something else completely. They're winning, Drusilla whispered beside him. The mermaids all have guns and are watching over them. He glanced at her, eyebrows raised. How can they be winning? He demanded. They're retreating. Oh, but they're angry now. Don't you feel it? It's like hornets in my eyes, Drew replied. God's truth, that is, Ned Jude rumbled behind them. Till now our lads were fighting for others, helping out their neighbors. This changes everything. Spike marveled once again at the skipper's hearing. Before he could reply, however, Ned cut the engine and let the sea spray drift. They had moved close enough to shore now that the nearest of the swimming soldiers had reached them. Lend a hand, the skipper called to Spike, who was astonished to find himself doing precisely that. After he had helped pull the first couple of soaked soldiers on board, however, the process took over. Men held onto the side of the boat as others climbed over them. Ned cranked up the engine and moved his ship closer to the shore, and soon enough the sea spray was full. The ruddy-faced skipper had a grave expression that was nevertheless filled with pride. He glanced at Spike, who had hoped not to have to get wet. Good a spot as any, Ned, Spike told him. He ducked into the cabin, pushing past soldiers who were astonished at the presence of Drusilla on the boat. For her part, his lover smiled coquettishly at the battered troops. Spike grabbed the 2 bags in which they packed a few items of clothing and pulled her by the hand as he went back out onto deck. When the soldiers realized they meant to get off the boat, they raised a fervor. But the skipper informed them that the young couple was not to be dissuaded. He explained the predicament about Drusilla's 3 brothers, and the men all nodded gravely. Ned got the boat close enough that the water was only up to Spike's chest when he jumped in. Drusilla was lowered gently over the side by several of the soldiers, and then the boat churned away toward a Navy vessel, so Ned could dump his load and then go back for the next. They washed ashore amidst a dense force of humanity. Now that he could truly see the numbers involved, Spike knew it would take days more before all the troops at Dunkirk could be withdrawn. He wondered if they had days to spare, or if the Germans would break down their defenses too soon. If so, there would be a massacre, with the blood and gore spread so thick across the landscape it would look like hell on earth. He was tempted to stay behind and see how it turned out, but they had places to be. Orleans, France, May 29th. Drusilla was bored. The war raged far and wide across France. The German army had split the nation in two and were trampling it underfoot. But by traveling at night on little-used roads, they had missed most of the carnage she had hoped to see. Thus far they had killed their fair share of both German and French soldiers at roadblocks and other spots along the way, and thus had acquired a cache of weapons and gasoline. but there was a kind of joylessness to the times in between that made her cranky. It had been chaos and dread and terror at Dunkirk, a dizzying carnival of wounded men and wounded spirits that had been like an amusement park ride to her. Spike had been furious at the dozens of questions, the need for them to repeat the lies about her brothers in Rotterdam over and over just to get away from the retreating army. He wanted to kill, and Drusilla would not have balked. She could envision the crescendo of death and viscera that would have ensued if they had begun to tear into the first of several 100,000 soldiers. The sound of blood pumping through one excited soldier's heart had been almost too much for her, and Drusilla had started to stroke him to distraction before Spike intervened. There had been a fight. The soldier's superior had been forced to step in. Drusilla had blown them both a kiss as Spike had dragged her away, chiding her. If she wanted Freya's strand, she would have to play along. A delicious thrill went through her every time she thought of that trinket, the necklace of the Breezings. Such an old bit of magic, such a wonderful toy. Oh, how she wanted it, sparkling there around her throat. The British soldiers had given them a clanking truck that would have been left behind otherwise. Spike was even angry about that. They had killed for the clothes they were wearing and the valises that they carried, and he had so wanted to kill for transportation, after having been around so many humans at one time. "What is it, Drew?" he snapped suddenly as the truck bumped over the rutted road. "Bored, she replied with a wave and a pout. "There's no music at all now. I'm buried in the grave of this dull war." Spike glanced sidelong at her, eyebrows raised. "You're not the only one who's bored, pet. Not to worry, though. Things will get more lively soon, I promise. We've got a lot of slayers in waiting to kill, and I know how that pleases you." Drusilla sighed. "I want whole vistas of war. Battlefields drenched in blood from horizon to horizon as the sweaty, wounded men murder each other, and the demons in their bellies spill out onto the ground. I want opera. Mushrooms grow in the shattered skulls of soldiers, and I want those too." He sighed. "Look, if we pass a big battle in progress, I promise we'll stop, all right?" She said, writhing pleasurably on the torn seat, sliding over to twine her fingers in his hair and scratch his chest. Spike barked in pain and shot her a withering glance before returning his attention to the road. "Not now, Drew," he snarled. "Come on," she wheedled. "You smell like chocolate. I want a taste. I want to be dirty, out on the ground under the moon, with my ear to the earth. I can hear the moans of the dying. They sound like crows." Spike's eyes blazed, and she could see he was tempted. A low chuckle rumbled in her throat. Bright lights flashed through the truck's cracked windshield, and Spike swore. "Bloody hell. Well, Drew, at least you got your wish." "Oh, goody," she said in a throaty rasp. He killed the truck's engine, then reached out to stroke her cheek. "You hungry, love?" "Famished." Drusilla opened the door and stepped out of the truck. The soldiers who ran toward them were French, and they held their weapons at the ready, wary of spies or German reconnaissance. Two of them stood in front of the truck, while one went to the driver's side door, and a fourth approached Drusilla, shouting at her to put her hands up. She obeyed with a shy smile, but she continued moving toward him, weaving her body like a serpent, speaking to him in lilting French. Her fingers twirled in the air before her, as though she were Salome, in this her last dance. And then her hands moved down over the peasant gown that covered the soft curves of her flesh. The two soldiers who stood in front of the truck at first frowned and called out for their fellow to be careful. But then they were watching her hands and eyes and the way she moved, listening to her voice. "That's it, lovely fatted calves," she told them in English, eyelids fluttering lazily, contentedly. "Come to me." The three were mesmerized. 50 yards beyond them, where the two large trucks were pulled across the road, 3 or 4 other men smoked cigarettes and eyed the new arrivals carefully. They were paying particular attention to Drusilla. They were too far away to be hypnotized, but close enough for enchantment and temptation. She provided both. On the other side of the truck, Spike offered the French soldier at the driver's window a cigarette. The man ignored him, glaring suspiciously. "Do you not see that we're British, Pierre?" Spike snapped, growing agitated. "Do I sound like a bloody Nazi to you?" In halting English, the French soldier, who was a bit older than the average and had quite a bit of stubble on his cheeks, admitted that Spike did not sound like a Nazi. "Look, old man, the war is behind us," Spike said. "We're going away from it. Seems like a damn sensible course of action to me. Can we just get on our way, then?" The French sergeant thought about it another moment, and then nodded in agreement. He was about to say something when his gaze went across the truck to Drusilla and the men who were gathered around her, flirting with her, even rubbing against her. The soldier frowned. Spike whipped open the door and knocked him back, then reached through the open window and ripped the soldier's gun from his hands before the man could even fall. With a short burst from the machine gun, he perforated the fallen man's chest, then turned the gun on the vehicles that comprised the roadblock. Bullets ripped the air. With a swift flick of her wrist, Drusilla tore out the throat of the man nearest her, then caught his body before it fell. Lithe and ghostly, it was easy for even Spike to forget her strength. But she turned the soldier around, got control of his gun, and then cut down the other two in front of her while using their comrade as a shield. She laughed as she did it. Gouts of blood from her human shield's torn jugular pumped from his throat to splash on the ground, and she stretched out her tongue to let the crimson flow splatter her mouth like a child catching snowflakes. Drusilla paid little attention to the soldiers at the roadblock. There were 3 of them left alive when she was extending her tongue for that special treat. One of those grunted in surprise as a bullet passed through his forehead, blowing the back of his skull out in a shower of bone and brain. "Damn it!" Spike shouted as the bullet tore through his ribcage. "I didn't want to get shot again." Drew flinched and began to whine, as if the pain were her own. Her baby was hurt. Poor Spike. She turned to glare at the 2 soldiers who still lived, hiding behind one of the trucks. "Naughty, naughty things," she said, her voice almost a groan, her features now contorted into the countenance of the vampire. "You hurt my baby." She dropped the corpse from her embrace. Weaponless, she began to run at the roadblock. They fired at her, but Drusilla moved so quickly, leaping from side to side, that not a single bullet touched her. Her hands went out to touch metal and then vaulted over the truck, rolled across the top, and fell on the men, talons whickering through the air as they slashed downward. The first man she blinded. The other died quickly, his neck broken by a simple twist. Spike stomped about petulantly, cigarette clenched between his teeth. "All right, love," she told her man. "Drusilla's going to make you all better. Here, have a bite. It'll do you wonders." Later, when they'd cleared off, taken the fuel and weapons the dead soldiers had bequeathed to them, Spike and Drusilla found a secluded villa and pulled off the road. They killed everyone inside, save for the elderly grandmother. She was blind and unable to walk, and it was far more amusing to leave her alive. When they had drunk their fill of the family and taken all the baubles that sparkled enough to catch Drusilla's eye, they made love in a slippery pile of gore in the second-floor bedchamber. She dug the bullet out of his flesh with her fingernails, then kissed and licked the wound until it was all better, and then they slept. Drusilla wasn't bored anymore. Nice, France, June 2nd. It was hard riding up the hill to Monsieur Arnaud's villa, but the girl did not mind. The little road rose up parallel to the crashing surf of the French Riviera, and the view was astonishing. When she had been taken away from her parents to be trained by the council, Colette Boisvert had never envisioned her preparation for the future would take place in such an idyllic location. Nor had she imagined that, during that time, all of Europe would be at war. It seemed distant to her, and Monsieur Arnaud insisted that it was none of their concern. They were fighting a war that had been going on for ages, and would continue long after the present conflict had ended, but it was still a distraction. Her parents were in Paris, and Colette feared for them. The muscles in her legs had begun to burn, and her lungs ached. Colette did not slow, however. Rather, she sped up, putting every ounce of effort she could summon into pedaling the last quarter mile to her watcher's villa. The girl lived in the center of Nice, in a moderately appointed apartment provided by the council, along with Sally, an older woman whom the council had appointed as her chaperone. A young girl could not very well live alone in a villa on the Riviera with a much older man without raising eyebrows. Perhaps the locals would not have cared, but Colette's parents had been adamant. She had decided that this was all for the best, as Monsieur Arnaud enjoyed an active social life that included a great deal of wine and at least half a dozen different local girls that Colette had seen come and go from the villa. Tonight was to be a celebration of sorts. Just lately they had been working to raise her proficiency with fighting stabs, as well as studying the various known demon species and methods of combating them. It was all quite rigorous, but she was up to it. This evening's dinner, no doubt to be accompanied by several toasts, was in honor of her completing her training in stabs. Tomorrow she would move on to fencing, and she was excited by the idea of it. The Three Musketeers was her favorite novel. At night, when she closed her eyes and put a name to the boy of her dreams, it was always D'Artagnan. Colette was 13 years old. She left her bike on the grass in front of the villa. No one would be up here this late at night, and even if someone were to come by, she was hardly worried about thieves. The very idea seemed absurd. In Paris, things had been different. Being in Nice, spending so much time at Monsieur Arnaud's villa, was like stepping back in time. Le Beau, the butler, met her at the front door. The man was insufferably smug nearly all the time. He did not work for the council, but was rather a servant of the Arnaud family. Though he would never dare have spoken his thoughts aloud, Le Beau had never done very much to hide his obvious disapproval of the amount of time Colette spent with his employer. The girl thought that, this evening, the old man looked even more put out and censorious than usual. "Bonsoir, Le Beau."
"Mademoiselle?" the man sniffed.
"Monsieur Arnaud, est-il là?" she asked, merely to be polite, for she knew Arnaud was at home. He had invited her, after all.
"La Soleil Manger,"
the butler replied curtly. He stood back to let her pass, and Colette rolled her eyes as she walked toward the dining room at the end of the hall. LeBeau closed the door behind her and went off into the bowels of the house to do whatever it was he did when he was not gruffly answering the door. Colette thought the rest of his job likely consisted of gossiping about his employer with the cook and the maid, but she said nothing to Arnaud. He would have been greatly saddened. As she walked down the corridor toward the dining room, Colette heard the sound of a woman laughing, high and delicate, a light breeze jostling a crystal chandelier. She paused just outside the large wooden door. Within, Arnaud laughed as well. Colette closed her eyes tightly and her chin fell, just a bit. Their dinner, their celebration, and he had forgotten, brought some perfumed trollop up from town. Her heart broke then, just a tiny crack, barely noticeable to any but herself. With a sigh, she began to turn away. Then her disappointment was replaced by anger, and Colette went to the dining room door and pulled it open. A slender, pale woman with cascading black hair sat too close to Monsieur Arnaud, sipping her wine and staring at him with wide eyes and a suggestive smile that said that he was the main course. Arnaud was quite obviously intoxicated, recounting some adventure or other in the drunkard's drawl. At the other end of the table sat a man with hair so blonde it was white. He smiled warmly at the girl as she entered, and Colette frowned.
"You have a guest, Henri,"
the woman said, and her accent revealed her to be English. Arnaud spilled his wine as he slid around in his chair. His face blossomed into an enormous grin when he saw Colette. He stood up and went to her, took her hand in his, and gradually led her farther into the room. She tried to ignore the reek of the wine that had spilled on his clothing. "My dear Colette," he said in English. She was not certain if he spoke the language of his guests to impress them, or because he knew that Colette needed to practice. "Let me introduce you to my new friends. They so wanted to meet you, and I did not think you would mind adding 2 more to our celebrations this evening. The young lady is Deandra, and the gentleman is her brother William." He then regarded his other guests more closely. "My friends, this is the girl I have been telling you about. My young pupil, Colette Beauvoir." The blond man rose from the table, lifting a wine glass in the process. He began to move around the table, closer to where Colette and Arnaud stood. There was something about his smile, a kind of brutal sparkle in his eyes, that told Colette immediately that he was not what he appeared to be. This was a cruel man. She could tell that just by looking at him. "Yes, congratulations," William said pleasantly. He had a grin like a prowling cat, and Colette did not trust him at all. She could not understand why Arnaud would have invited such people back to his home. Then she noticed the woman again. Even now she was refilling Arnaud's wine glass. After that, Colette understood perfectly. "A toast, shall we?" William asked. "Now that you've finally arrived, that is." He moved closer, until he was standing only a few feet from Colette and Arnaud. "We've been waiting for you." Venice, Italy, June 12th. Alessandra Cavallaro lingered in the twilight realm between consciousness and death. She had long since lost the feeling in her arms and legs. Now the 14-year-old only felt heavy. So heavy. She had been hung from the doors of St. Mark's Cathedral by heavy metal spikes, railroad spikes, that had been driven into her open palms and the tops of her feet. They had capered on the cobblestone square at 4 a.m, killing 7 different people who had passed by and tried to come to her aid. And then they had stabbed her in the side with a long knife and knelt beneath her with their mouths open, as if for communion. Or, perhaps more accurately, like besotted revelers falling open-mouthed before the open tap of a free-flowing beer barrel. Only when the sky began to lighten, and people began to emerge onto the open square before the cathedral, did they at last withdraw. Alessandra could not move by then, not even blink. Her own blood, what remained of it, had begun to fill her lungs and chest cavity, and soon she was drowning in it, choking on it, tasting its copper flavor in her mouth. Her last coherent thought was a jolt of fear, wondering if somehow that would make her like them. Warsaw, Poland, June 16th. Weeping, cradling his broken arm against his body as best he could in the makeshift sling he had fastened around his neck, Joseph Straukas dragged the broken mule by of Mara Bajic half a mile to get her out of the filthy street. It was the only way he could be sure that the dogs would not get to her corpse. After he had sent for help, Joseph sat and stroked the girl's brown hair and shook with the power of the sobs that tore through him. Maria Bajic had been murdered at the age of 11.